Hello and welcome to the studio. I'm Peter Stjanovic and this is Tapping Talent in a Global Shortage. The global shortage or big discussion. Tapping talent is all what we need to discuss right now. But first, do you all agree that there is a shortage of talent, tech talent in particular? Nicola, why don't you go first?
I think there's always shortage of excellent people. I would argue there is probably a little bit less shortage now than it was in terms of tech market than it was 6 months ago or a year ago. It feels like, the market is a little bit more employers market now than it was until very recently, which is not to say that things won't flip again in the next 6 months. And it's also, again, not to say that exceptional people or even great or excellent people are easy to come by. So for me, it feels a bit easier now than it did 6 months ago. Looking at a macro level, it might just be shuffling of the cards, and we may very well be still facing shortage overall.
Okay, all to play for. Avril, would you agree? Or at the Royal Pharmaceutical Society, what's your perspective?
I agree, but semi-disagree. Come on, let's kind of like play it out for a little bit of fun. There will always be, I suppose, in a way, a shortage because technology's at the forefront. So there's only going to be a thin layer of talent that's experienced it. And obviously as organizations go, oh, I want someone that's experienced it that can come in and show us how to do it. Actually, now it's about how do you innovate, how do you fast learn, how do you learn from each other, how do you network and do that, and where possible, share between sort of companies who can do that. Obviously, not everyone can do that. So I would argue we'll always be in a shortage because it's not like other traditional professions where you just, go through that. We always need to learn. So there'll always be a shortage of the next stage of technology. So it's how do we handle that?
And is that something then, a position that the industry is aware of, do you think? Or is it actually an education piece that we're never going to have the right talent? Because as you say, it's all about working to the technology that was yesterday.
Yeah, I think I hear a lot, I can't find the right talent, I can't find this. I mean, I've done the same, yeah? This is not just everyone else, I do exactly the same. So it's about challenging myself and my perceptions. But I also feel, and I'm going to do a little bit of a curveball here, I think there's a whole thing around technology and our image. And I very rarely go, ooh, women in IT, Carl, but I am going to say from a perception perspective, I've met so many incredible women that work in technology. And then you hear them say, oh, I'm not a technologist. Well, where's that coming from? Well, I don't code. Well, actually, we are the most diverse industry in terms of skill set. From everything, from how you interact with applications, how the linguistics is on top form, the psychology behind that, the design, the data, the analysis, that requires different skill sets. Yet so there's a big pool of people that don't then associate themselves with being technology or technologists. So I think there's another angle here in terms of, I think we've got a wider talent pool. It's really rife for career switching and things like that. But let's, encourage them to do that and think themselves as technologists. You don't have to just code to be a technologist.
Okay, interesting. I think we could just come up to that point later on. Angelina, in the US, from your PayPal's perspective, is there a different almost psychology around talent, or does what Avril's mentioned resonate?
I think it absolutely resonates. There are so many different skill sets and positions within technology that we need to look for. So while there's the coding aspect and understanding the different languages in the programs, there's also the analytical aspect and ensuring that we continue to push work along so that we can be as efficient and effective as possible. So just thinking outside the box in a new way of working in terms of your IT operating model and how your organization is set up. But I would have to somewhat disagree that there is a talent shortage. because I think that it's more so around companies needing to get more innovative and thinking outside of the biases of where good talent comes from, and then also investing in talent development. So at my previous company, I worked very closely with talent acquisition to develop some recruiting programs that worked outside of the typical 4-year university where we would normally, get a technologist. One was a junior technology apprenticeship program. So it was looking at talent, maybe with just a high school diploma or with an associate's degree, that, those people were genuinely interested in technology and maybe coding, software development. So bringing those folks in and having this rotational program so that they can get the tools and techniques to continue to grow and develop their skill sets and their talents. Partnering them with good mentors at the executive leadership levels to really invest in the development of these folks, and then bringing them in as a cohort so that they have their peers to lean on to keep them, motivated, engaged, and excited about the work. You don't have to always go for the upper echelon of talent. I think that we just have to do a better job of, investing and developing some really great, eager people with tenacity.
And almost therefore widening the taxonomy of what we mean by talent. Sal, that brings me to you then. You've got quite a wide remit at IFS then. So when we think about different types of talent, how do you as a tech leader approach that? We've heard different points of view on what talent is and what they need and what they don't need. But what's your perspective?
It's funny, right? I actually have to say there's an absolute talent shortage. And I'm surprised that we think there isn't. There's an absolute talent shortage. But I think the answer is very different when you dissect it, in that the talent we now need in the modern world and what is now happening is slightly different to the talent we needed 12 months ago. We need cyber specialists. That is such a small pool globally, not just in the UK, on which you can get cyber consultants, cyber analysts. So we're all fighting for that small pool, and they're not being generated fast enough from STEM-related, courses in university or degrees. So unless, exactly as she says, we take apprenticeship, we take business people, and we turn them, and we don't go for that niche nugget of trying to employ somebody that's perfect, but take somebody that's good enough and actually grow them in the company, you're never going to get that. Data scientists, machine learning people. These are different skill sets now that we need. There is an absolute shortage. If you want a traditional Java developer and coder, you probably got 100,000 of them in India, another, whatever, you can go and get them. So that's not the issue. But we have a shortage, and we have a shortage also because of other issues. The pandemic has absolutely changed the way people have worked. We've lost people through migration, people in the tech industries, people changing, I don't want to be in this anymore, I want to do something else as a career move. So we've lost some really, really good people from that basis as well. But we're very big in offshore. And just to your point on diversity, very, very proud. We've almost got a 38.9% diversity in the actual technical piece. But I also agree with your point that anybody who works for a software company or a technology company is in technology. Whether it's HR, marketing, or anything else, they're working for a technology company. And the world is run on technology now, so they pretty much are technologists in many ways as well. But I think, if you're recruiting like we do as well, Peter, 500, 600, 800 people a year as part of a growth plan, then finding that talent is tough.
Yeah, we have a kind of reverse problem, possibly to Avril's, right? Which is that some of the skills that we need are actually at the platforms that are legacy platforms or heritage platforms kind of thing, where the skills have disappeared or, people have retired or just don't want to do it. And that's a shame. But also our other kind of talent challenge is we've been finding out, because I agree with you, Sal, there's definitely been a talent shortage generically. It does feel easier now, but it's still kind of there. So one of the things that we've had to think about is I have a very small team. It's only about 45 people in the UK, but we have 800 to 1,000 people from TCS and Vodafone that we've outsourced to. Mm-hmm. Now, TCS is one of the global top 10 employers by number, but even they have struggled with, have they got the right resource? And what we've discovered is that if I don't pitch Tata Steel UK, what we're doing, why we're doing it, where it fits, what the languages are, what the challenges are, to the TCS team, who then pitch it to their internal resource or to their potential recruits, we don't get the talent. So you've kind of got a double step problem almost in the talent war. Not only do I need to find the right sort of people to join an organization that has a broad set of IT skills, but I've got to help my key partners also find the
And you
key
have
resources.
a bigger problem with TCS in that the attrition rate now in that part of it is running at 40%.
Yeah.
So that's an issue for your talent as well.
Retention, I think we all can agree, is a difficult topic. So how does retention then sit alongside the finding the talent? What are the factors involved in looking to retain talent, whilst also looking to attract talent that are presumably attritioning from somewhere else? I have totally made that word up, but I'm going to stand by attrition.
Sounds good. Look, I'll have a go first. I think the important thing about retention is key. The key talent you need to retain. You can't retain everybody, right? It's a natural phenomenon that you're going to lose a certain percentage of workforce because their lives change and they move on. But your key individuals that your organization is so dependent on, you have to retain them, and you have to use mechanisms like a long-term incentive plan, by giving them something much more than everybody else that would see them stay the 3 years, the 5 years you need them to stay, or giving them flexible benefits, or giving them, many other things to allow them to stay. And then I think you've really got to drive the culture of the company, and you've got to drive and in this, I think the best thing that has happened is the pandemic. That's my opinion, right? Because what it's done for people like us is allowed people to stay with you and think, now I can stay with this company. They're loyal to me. They're flexible. They're allowing me to get up in the morning, take my kids to the school, drop them, switch on when I want to, work, switch off again, come fetch my kids, see to them, then switch on again and work. And therefore, I will stay with this company. It's great. So I think that type of flexible working better is going to retain people. Companies have to change their culture and their ethos to allow people to have more flexibility. And then long-term incentive plans, I think, are key as well.
It was really interesting. So I come from big tech. I spent most of my career in big tech, where churn is single digit, so less than 10%, which I never really appreciated how unusual that is. And then having joined kind of the rest of the industry and having kind of worked at a company where, when I joined, I think tech team had 25% annual churn, which is also not considered bad in most of the industry, but to me it was unimaginable. I just couldn't imagine that, my team of 500, that in order to just stay in the same place, we have to hire more than 100 people every year. It felt so inefficient and wasteful, and all that domain knowledge that people acquire just kind of disappears at a rate of 25% annually. So it was a big focus for me. Very proud of kind of the difference we made there over the past year. We're down to 12%. The key thing for me, it's always about understanding what motivates people, and external incentives like money certainly make a difference, and goes without saying. That's why most of us work. But however, I can't emphasize enough. I don't think it's the only thing. I think career development is a really big one, and people seeing how their career could develop at that company, having well-established progression ladders, having a process that's considered fair, having great managers who can coach you and help you kind of grow and kind of go on. In my opinion, that's one of the things why people would stick not just 3 or 5, but potentially even 10 years if the scope of the role is large.
How long did it take you to get from 25% churn to 12% churn?
So it took just over a year. I don't feel it's entirely entirely fair to claim the credit, because the macroeconomic situation did change in the last 6 months. I think everyone probably saw a drop in churn from that, what did we call it, great resignation, and everyone changing jobs just after COVID, to now where people are like, oh crap, like I gotta stick to the job if I can, or kind of there are layoffs everywhere and all that. I do think we did make, I want to think that we made a difference to half of that, and then half of that was the kind of external market, but obviously it's kind of not entirely scientific.
Avril, when we think about where one finds talent, are we looking in the right places, do you think? I'm just thinking about the comment you made earlier around the small layer.
Can I ever so slightly, very quickly, just make an additional comment? Because I think there's a layer at the Royal Pharmaceutical Society and other organisations like this. It's about people connecting with the purpose. Yeah. So actually for us, it's a real privilege to support the pharmacy profession, pharmaceutical scientists, the safe and effective use of medicines. So actually, it's not about money for us. I'm up for anything, but it's not, because that passion and that, for me, actually, if you connect to that passion and purpose of the organisation, that's how you get some of that retention. But finding that talent, I do feel there's a lot more around career breaks, switching, and this is for all. I'm obviously not, saying it from a lens and a women IT lens. I don't want to be seen to, this is about sort of diverse of thought, diverse of skill set. And what the best thing is we should really stop. And I think a number of you've probably done this already. It's irrelevant what degree you've done. Yes. It is, honestly, right? If we talk about some of the stuff I did back at my degree, really, is that relevant? I don't think so. But it's right now about who they are, what they believe in, how they learn, how they explore, how they get on with others. Sponge for new things, because we're learning, we're changing. In fact, even legacy, you've got to have a little bit of an excitement of learning. This is curious. How did this actually work?
Curiosity is a really
Curiosity is key. So I feel what's lovely, and I think over the last couple of years, there's been a real acknowledgement of stop thinking traditional profession. Create it open. What are the similar skill sets and talents and sort of mindsets that we're looking for that you get across different disciplines that you can then bring in and do?
Just to bring that to Angelina. Angelina, I know, I don't want to keep on referencing where you are in the world, but the US does have a different set of trends in talent than Europe. Different scope for moving around different cities, a different relationship with work identity, and dare I say, a difference of how you approach work ethic. What trends in talent have you seen in a pay plan in the US post-pandemic that might be a bit different, I think, to us in the UK?
So I think there's a couple of things that factor into the trends that we're seeing in the US in terms of talent. I think, for one, post-pandemic, more and more employees, and I think we alluded to it earlier, are looking for flexibility in how they work. So looking at hybrid remote environments, the ability to be essentially a digital nomad is very intriguing to a lot of, especially the younger generation employees, where they want to go and work out of the country for a month or work in the mountains for 6 weeks. Having that ability and flexibility to be able to kind of have that work-life balance where they're doing something that's really where they're very curious and they're able to kind of, contribute to the greater good of an organization, but in the way that they want, on their terms, is really what we are seeing. And then also with the younger generation, again, as well, there is a need to continuously learn. And so having to invest in career development, helping them understand where their next, role, what their next role might look like. Instead of, someone working in their, current role for 3 to 5 years, they're looking at 12 to 18 months, and then they're asking, hey, what's next for my career? So ensuring that we are keeping them motivated and engaged, continuing to provide them challenging work, individualizing each person, because what motivates one person may not motivate another. So really tapping into that individual, what gets them excited to come to work today, and then also providing the flexibility so that they can, continue to contribute while, traveling the world essentially.
I love that you brought up generations because I'll come to you next, Nick, but just as a point, I think we have the most number of generations in the workforce ever, which is fascinating. And as you've alluded to, Angelina, there's a level of personalization, not to an individual, but also to generational cohorts and what they want and how they interact with each other, which I suppose as leaders, one has to manage as teams, but also direct. Not all of those expectations are reasonable in the contexts of your organizations. So that is an added layer of discussion.
Yeah.
Was that?
Sorry, I was just triggered by Angelina saying about, find out what motivates people. Avril said as well. But when you then scale that up, if your organization is several hundred, several thousand strong, how do you make sure that everybody is playing their role in that? We often say, I think you said, well, everybody's in tech kind of thing. Well, we're also probably all in some degree HR and HR support. So we can't rely on an HR business partner to solve the problem for us. No, so to some extent, we've got to take it on. But there is a real challenge there as you try to scale up everybody's ambition. So ultimately, you've got to try and segment and group it up and sort of say, okay, with this group, it's this, and this group, it's that. I was interested as well, you mentioned, Angelina, about sort of people with an expectation to move kind of frequently. I read an article that said when you join a company, the company should be clear to you that you're joining that company like you joined school or a university for a reasonable time, but not forever. Now, with 32 years in the same company, I find that really difficult. But I've had 3 mainstream careers in that time through sales, procurement, and IT. And I've worked all around the world. So I've been lucky to have joined a very large company. Not everybody has that opportunity. We're now much smaller than we were. But, I find that quite a tricky concept that, you're only going to be in a company for a short period of time.
Again, generational expectations, are they right, are they wrong? I mean, maybe it's not for us to sort of discuss, to qualify that, but it's us to realise what the effects are and how we navigate those effects. How do you all then manage those expectations? Presumably you've all got different generations in there, and in your teams, you're smiling, Milena, you must have a number of them.
The one that comes to mind is sort of what we already brought up around expectations around working remotely as opposed to coming into the office. Right now, we keep it flexi first, so we let people come and choose when they want to come in. It is a challenge. It comes with trade-offs. On one hand, it gives you access to much wider pool of talent, which is fantastic. On the other hand, I'm really starting to get worried about our ability to train up entry-level talent, because I don't think I ever quite thought about this before. I spent most of my career so far coming into the office, I guess 5 days a week most times. The amount of learning you get from overhearing colleagues around your desks and how they show up and how they behave, I worry we're letting that entire entry level of people down by never inviting people into the office or not inviting them regularly or not enforcing that to be the case. However, it is a challenge. We're still deliberating what do we do, and do we keep large offices and keep access to more or less global talent by keeping things mainly remote, or do we kind of try to go back a little bit more to the...
Well, I think it was the John Lewis partnership a few years ago which believed that many of its entry-level university graduates didn't have the soft skill sets that were required to work in an organisation. So even if they're university graduates, they initiated some new soft skill training, which, if you heard that 20 years ago, you'd think, wow, that would never happen in the future, but of course it has. So you're not just navigating a talent shortage or a possible talent shortage, I think we're in disagreement on, but you're also navigating what talent you do have, not having the skills that you necessarily want, it's less smooth. Has that impacted on your ability to perform as a function, as a business, do you think? A tangible effect, or is it perhaps indirect? And that's to anyone.
I think it's indirect. I think we've seen the benefit of the pandemic, and I don't know if everybody will agree with me in that it forced us into lockdown. So it forced remote working, right? We didn't actually choose to go remote working. It forced us into remote working. And the productivity actually went up. It was funny, right, to many extents. And I agree with you in the generational piece. And we have one of the youngest workforces because we have 2,300 people out in Sri Lanka and another 700 in Kolkata. And the average age is about 24 to 25. So it's very, very young. And I agree, what they want is something slightly different than we wanted many years. We stayed loyal and we stayed committed, and we bought into the company ethos and culture. Now it's about work-life balance, absolutely key, and it's about shorter goals and careers and constant on the move, but reward's still the big thing, right? Don't judge it, and flexible benefits. But I think the real key to your question there is to ensure that with the generational people, you are still investing in the remote world. That onboarding piece that you talked about around the desk, you have to bring them in for that onboarding. And you have to onboard them physically and face-to-face, and then let them go remote again. And then managing, people managers in the remote world is now key and different. You have to have, you almost have to invest in your managers about how they manage.
Retrain the manager.
Yes, to manage a remote workforce is totally different. Some managers don't even check in with people. And so you get these mental issues constantly boiling up and so on. And then the next one, I think, is you have to almost shift to an online learning and development platform. Look, it's going to go that way for universities, for schools, and so you have to start doing it in the workforce. So you can keep people trained and developed. All you've got to do is start shifting towards shifting them onto an online learning management platform, and then monitoring them through that, and forcing the completion of training on that to be able to shift to that mentality.
I agree with everything you said. I think the only bit I would challenge, and maybe not even necessarily because I think differently, but I think it's a topic that's worth bringing up, is sort of, do your generations genuinely want different things, or are they kind of pushed into a place where they're less loyal to the employer and less willing to stick around, or less likely to stick around, exactly because they don't have that link of being in the office, meeting people as real people, it's very, for me, it's very hard to figure out what's the cause and what's the consequence.
The young generation have a different set of criteria than we had. So for example, the young generation will put sustainability as their number one. And if an organization hasn't got sustainability as part of its strategy, they'll churn. They'll go somewhere else. They don't want to work for a company that's not thinking
I'd love
about
to know the data on that. So I'd love to know the data. It's one of those things that gets brought up, and I hear it a lot. But I'd love to know actually where people are going, because it's one of those things where, back to sort of Nick's point, obviously money being a driving factor. When we think about cost of living crisis and some of the underlying things happening, when it actually comes to it, what actually happens. But I know what you mean. There are certain assumptions on generations about what they do. And what you're saying, Milena, is how much of that is driven by where they are versus what actually could be happening in a neutral territory. It's very interesting, perhaps an unanswerable question, which is great because, in this context, I really want us to end on those questions which we haven't yet answered. I think, as we've already established, this is a very interesting topic, and it's quite rare to have several different perspectives on talent. It just shows how much more discourse is needed. For your own perspectives, what are your biggest challenges with talent? Or the biggest challenge, sorry, that's too wide a question. What's your biggest thing right now that you're thinking about talent? We've discussed education, we've discussed new emerging tech skills, we've even discussed nomenclature of what talent is. I'm sure there's more. What for you is under-discussed or unanswered?
I can go. On the individual contributor side, for me would be getting more people to be generalist or T-shaped. I think that makes a massive difference in terms of being able to redeploy people as priorities change. And if anything, last couple of years have taught us is that context changes a lot. And I worry a little bit, partly as other stuff that we spoke about here, sometimes people go after that latest trend in generative AI, or it was crypto a couple of years ago. Before that was wearable or mobile or whatever is the latest trend. So people describe themselves as that kind of engineer. And I just don't think that's good kind of for everyone. And I can see why that would be sometimes for very short-term marketability. But I think I like to hire engineers. I like to hire people, not technologies. So I think that's one thing, just trying to round up the capability on the team so that more people describe themselves as generalists and are willing to work on different technologies. And then on the manager side of things, or engineering leadership side of things, it would be just, I feel, general up-leveling, because within technology, I think we tend to promote our best engineers sometimes into management, and sometimes that works out great, sometimes maybe not so much. I think when you look at it, I think in general, engineering leadership and management needs to be stronger almost everywhere where I work or had exposure. So that's the other side of the coin.
Fantastic. Avril, your thoughts?
Well, I was trying to think as I was listening to such a great answer, actually. I think obviously I'm coming from an angle where obviously I don't work for a global organization. We might obviously sell some of the medicine information, but the company's really quite small. The team's quite small. I do not have the opportunity for pipeline. There are things that we can do externally that we can support growth and do hackathons, but not necessarily offer them roles or apprenticeships after. We don't have the money or the size of that. So for me, and I'll answer the question, and things that I always kind of sort of challenge myself on is, I talk about purpose, that's fantastic, but purpose, you still need to pay the mortgage. And there is a fine line to what you can learn, what you do, but also as well, again, haven't worked for a big corporate in my life and small organizations, the breadth of your skills in the role in a small organizations need to be much broader, because you're doing several hats in one go. And therefore, it's trying to make people feel comfortable that you're not going to be an expert in everything, because you're trying to lean that, you're helping out here, there's a gap, you'll do this. And we're not, back to that, we're not going to be perfect. And I think that's the thing that we need to sort of keep teaching ourselves, that, we are sort of in smaller organizations stretching, learning, doing, and sometimes things don't work, right? And that's okay. How do you recover? How do you learn from that? So it's instilling that mindset that I want you for more than your role. Yes. I'm looking for you to contribute to the vision. I'm really looking for you to sort of do that. And because it's smaller, you feel that connection more. Now, it might be the wrong thing to say, I know you feel, but especially sort of the more junior staff, because there's not so far to go to understand why you're doing things.
I'm looking for you, I'm not looking for your title.
Yeah.
Nice.
Peter, I must, some of the unanswerable questions I mentioned at the beginning, we're dependent on kind of an ecosystem of partners. And so how we pitch ourselves, where we pitch ourselves, how we sell ourselves, given we've got a high degree of uncertainty about our long-run future position, that's a real challenge, and finding our way through that. The only other thing that's really, we had really good success recruiting 2 people last year after about 9 months of searching, both of who had been made redundant from previous roles, were in the right geography for us, actually do like coming to the office, and are not 22. Obviously, you have to be careful how you say it, but they're not 22 or 23. A lot of people post-COVID, said, well, I've reached a certain age, I've got a certain amount of money, I'll do something else. Yeah. The cost of living has definitely changed that perspective, perhaps, but also maybe our attitude is, in the same way we talk about hybrid and flexible and all those things for the new entrants, there's potentially a workforce out there of a particular profile that might be quite interested, and how do we, I don't know how you quite tap into that, because it's become very dispersed. But that's ready-made experience, clear understandings, motivation that might be clear, could be well attached to a purpose, because it's not necessary. Yeah. So you're sold.
That was easy.
Yeah. So there's supply and there's demand. It's how do you bring those together?
Fascinating. That's a great answer. Thank you.
For me, I'm going to be bit more controversial. I think the unanswered one for me, you touched on earlier on, and Neville touched on it, which is, where do we find the talent pool, right? I still don't think we've answered that. And I think we have to shift completely from where we are today. This whole recruitment process is a nightmare. Put a job description out there, having a degree, all these mandatory requirements, everything, then spend 90 to 100 days trying to find somebody, then fill them in, and then they might leave you 6 months later, and you spend 40 grand trying to recruit them. I think that whole pool thing, Peter, we've got to change the whole dynamic. You've touched on it a little bit. I almost think a degree doesn't matter. I'd like to go to apprenticeships. I'd like to take A-level students and say, come and work for the next 2 years and I'll train you. I'd like to take tech girls and already start offering them something while they're finishing their school about a job and where they can come in and grow the next generation ready, because STEM related is not creating enough to be able to get the jobs. I'd like to take blue collar workers, exactly as you've just indicated, and push them into technology. I'd like to take business people who have the process knowledge and push them into the IT and the tech as a talent pool. I think we have to find new ways of where we find that pool, because the way we're still going about it is just not going to cope.
Sounds like universities need to watch their backs. So.
They have to, because they're still traditionally teaching computer science degrees and old languages and old methodologies, and it just doesn't survive. And as you said yourself, those people come out, they might have a PhD, but they just don't have leadership skills. They just don't have the qualities you're looking for to be able to do stuff. Whereas if you brought them directly into your business, you could invest in that and you could find the real leaders.
I think we could discuss that all afternoon. Yes. Are so many questions in my head. But Angelina, we will close the session with you. It has gone by very fast. But from your perspective, unanswered questions, and we have discussed quite a bit already, so granted, I put you on the spot here being last. What would your big question be for yourself and for the rest of the roundtable?
Absolutely. Well, I think that I am in 100% alignment with what everyone has said already today. And if you are interested in apprenticeship, I have the program for you.
You got 2 jobs.
But, I think to just expand on, investing in different types of places to find the talent, lower socioeconomic areas, teaching STEM to children at the elementary school level, middle school level, getting them excited about technology, engineering, math, etc. I am from the business side. I did not start or make my start into technology until maybe about 8 years ago. So I was able to kind of transfer my business knowledge into the technology world and be successful. And then bridge that gap between business and technology to get other business-minded folks excited about the technology work that we're trying to push out on behalf of them. But I'd also say, tapping into diverse talent. So again, not looking at the traditional technologists, looking at, bringing in more people of color, neurodiverse talent. Is something that I know a lot of companies are really starting to, just kind of on the cusp of bringing in those types of programs. Here at PayPal, 27% of our global talent workforce is women, which is great, but we still have more work to do to even get more women into the technology industry. So I think that, we just have to look outside our traditions and ensure that we are looking at the most diverse slate, and that will allow us to be even more successful.
Brilliant. It sounds like, if I can round off really quickly, that there is a shortage, but there's a shortage because of where we're looking in here. And if we look elsewhere, it becomes not a shortage, but perhaps a nice, even ground, a neutral ground to get the right people at the right place, obviously in a nice context. But much to discuss. And thank you all very much for joining us at the studio to discuss this really fascinating topic.